welcome back. This will be a follow-up to the martial arts video, so if you haven't seen it, please go watch it first, because things might be said. Some things might need to bleed over. But one thing I've definitely noticed about highly trained martial artists in comics, it doesn't have to be just regular, um, American comics. It could be, thicker graphic novels, or even, you know, I said manga-based ones. It always seems as though that even if they don't have any real powers, they seem to be at a far greater degree of physical strength. You know, through expert conditioning, and it doesn't really seem, and because they don't really seem to, show as many signs of fatigue at a certain point. It shows that they can more or less, they can definitely go do so much more than a regular human with less effort. I mean, a lot of characters are often shown, running, blindingly fast, often in a panic. But if they, sometimes you could say maybe like someone like with a limited amount of ninja ideas could actually move a little bit faster. It just seems like they naturally can move at a speed fairly similar to if you run down a hill, um, and can keep your balance for a good while. And while this is actually pretty helpful, um, pure martial arts, when facing up against various villains, may not really work. I mean, if you were to have like a bunch of like those nerve strikes that were shown in Kung Fu Panda, for all you know, that actually would make things worse, because the tricks that you learned on Earth are do the opposite to someone like Thanos or one of his children. It's like if the natural response is just to basically, okay, we're gonna block, the chi. It said, but then it's like, no, you actually increased it. So you never know what that could actually do, but you need to make sure that you do at least. They at least need to make sure that they have something, um, kind of as a backup. If they do have the ability, so if they can basically just concentrate their own chi and do something like the God Hand technique, which is just you kind of like what Iron Fist does, but less, I wouldn't necessarily say dramatic, but because it can definitely cut through things in things I've seen, but it doesn't have to be this over, massive, wave of energy, and that actually causes a problem for um, comic book versions of Iron Fist, because it seems like he puts so much behind it. It's not like he's, it's it's not like he's put on a glove, like a very heavy gauntlet, and he's just using that kind of momentum um, to move it around. This one is almost like, you touch something and it's meant to basically explode. Like, anyone's ever seen Power Rangers when they do that spark, when they are hit and they do that spark thing? If you actually look close enough, you actually can see. Sometimes you can see little patches on their suits, and that's what actually causes them to, make the sparks and nothing happen. The problem is that, with like with what they showed with Iron Fist, is that he hits you, and there's a lot of blowback. Kind of like if you're in Pokemon and you use something like that of Double Edge, that's what's coming back to you. But it's more like it actually decreases your overall usage of it for the day rather than your total health. So that can definitely be an issue, and I would definitely would say another problem that basically standard martial arts has is that they like to yell too much when they fight. Um, that could pretty much give your position away, like for a really good ambush. And yeah, said I believe that certain martial arts, when they go for certain moves, they often may have tells, very similar to like poker players. So you may realize that the yell is a little bit higher, then okay, this is going to be a kick. If it's lower, it's going to be a punch, and that could be very easily intercepted. The idea is to essentially strike, pretty quickly, to incapacitate or even destroy your opponent so that no one knows what's happened. Kind of like what Batman could do to you if basically you're not meant to, It said if you're not in the same area, you don't see, hey, these guys just got taken out like they were nothing, but you didn't hear anything. Because I know that in there was once this I forget exactly. I said it was actually a version of something called The Protector, an older film in which they actually showed one of his training routines was actually walking over a like these kind of spring loaded pads, and the idea was the fact that you were supposed to walk over them without causing any creaks. Just as if anyone's seen like the idea of saying how to pick up instead pickpocket, can basically reach into someone's and without even making a sound, and they would have actually practiced like a bell. So in this case, if you move the bell, then that's what would give yourself over. And for me, that's basically all the yelling. I mean, in theory, is that if you're that disciplined, you don't want to give them an opening by that. I mean, and it also sounds like if you're yelling that much, you might actually be signaling, "Hey, I can't actually defeat this person. If anyone is nearby, instead answer my yells." Because it said not everything has to be there. It said because in this case, you want to make sure you control, your pulse, and your breathing, and yelling constantly like that just doesn't seem to be as effective. And it always seems like in various martial arts movies, they don't really do too much of the yelling when they're really fighting things unless it's for dramatic emphasis or spoofs. It's like they want to get over and done with. And look what happened in the Karate Kid. Essentially when the guy tried to cripple Daniel, he didn't really give any indication that that's what he was about to do. Um, and it's just like if you start giving yourself away like that, it's not going to be helpful. And so, and even if you could be, well trained enough to actually resist all of, some of the blows, that doesn't mean your enemies will give you the same level of, you know, respect and actually, not hold their powers back. If this is, the enemies are definitely going to try to kill you. They will kill you with whatever they can do. There may be some degree of play into it, but the idea is the fact they just want to see you beg for mercy instead, and then they could actually take it down. Because if anyone, it's kind of like when they actually showed Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Um, while the Rangers could actually defeat putties on their own, they actually had a sound to them. Like they were not just they weren't just people in costumes. They wanted to sound like they actually were made out of clay. So, and you could possibly argue that because of everything, that kind of like the power that the Rangers were connected to, maybe they were a little bit stronger than that. But again, for regular civilians to do the same thing, without any real training, you're not gonna have that, bit of luck on your side. I mean, in this case, if you're talking about a creature that is covered with some type of dangerous energy like fire, electricity, or even highly corrosive chemicals, nothing's really going. Said it doesn't matter how many. It said how well you can do Bruce Lee's 1 inch punch when the fact that you just even touching this person will cause it said will cause you to burst into flames and will be crippled within seconds. And the enemy could just be standing there like said, really, you thought that was going to work? And then they may just say, said, here, have some more, and that's the character. So that's kind of where maybe some degrees of the weapon training can come into play. Um, you definitely do have some options for ranges. I mean, throwing knives or something. A very long bow staff instead could be there. Good sized swords and spears could definitely help bridge that gap so you don't directly have to attack something that you can't actually that will actually be dangerous to you. And so that definitely helps. And you could say part of the reason why you learned certain weapons could have been one of the many animal styles of kung fu. Um, More or less, that if someone wants to say, "Hey, I want to learn a kung fu based off of whatever my spirit animal is." So if you basically find out that you actually have something like that, have a snake, then you could, so then you would definitely would define yourself a little bit more with the snake styles of fighting. But you still need to maybe try to worry about um, other issues. I mean, I know this is only a movie, but if anyone has ever seen Snake and the Eagle Shadow, essentially Jackie Chan has learned snake style, but then after watching how a cat was actually able to kill a cobra, he essentially decided to actually incorporate that. So it's almost like essentially would say you're moving like a snake, but it literally has a cat's claw for a head. So and then again, like I said, that kind of movie definitely showed some of the awkward issues with actually going up, say, with pure martial arts characters, and the fact that you could be the nicest person possible, but if you're not from the same school, someone someone always seems to hunt you down and will not basically fight with honor. It's almost as though they're the ones that will use their gifts not for self defense, but I guess self offense, if you want to call it that. Because they definitely, like I said, and look at what happened, with the members of Cobra Kai. It seemed like they were just purely trained, to harm people as best as possible, and they just happened to actually have, karate on their side. But all that kind of discipline could definitely weigh you down. Because in this case, you want to honor the school and the master. But if someone says this is horrible for this very reason, and you can't break away, you might is that they may force you to commit ritual suicide or break you until something happens. Because it always just seems as though that uh, a lot of say while characters can learn how to fight to be very efficient, they want to basically be over and done with as quick as possible. It's not like fighting, trading blows back and forth, like in Dragon Ball. I mean, in this case, you could say that if this is the last character, cosmically, like someone is giving you a script that's saying, yes, you said you will defeat this character, but you're going to be in really messed up shape afterwards. Um, instead, rather than just quickly neutralizing whatever's. Kind of like what happens with like the Terminator franchise. It said, it always seems like Arnold's character is always beaten within an inch of his functioning life, and that it said, but still wins. It said, yet, but he does have all that experience on his side. However, the fact that he's still it's an outdated model, definitely shows the fact, how quickly, some other ways of upgrading oneself um, can be more effective. I mean, even if one was to say, well, we have the 850 model rather than the 800, I said that is fine, but um, if it seems as though that just a few numbers difference can be very different, then that's a problem. Because when they actually showed like the TX, she was essentially a T900 that was actually coated with the polyamidic metal, and then they just gave her the added weapon onboard weaponry. So it doesn't. It said you can definitely be prepared, to fight against anything, but it always seems like the bad guys really have a lot of toys and they don't like to play fair. So I mean, and I would say that if some characters do have like somewhat enchanted weapons, that could work in their favor. Um, but it's not the same thing as But it's not like you touch like Thor's hammer and you become imbued with its power. It's more like, okay, yeah, I can throw this knife and it'll always come back to me, and I won't have to worry about it not catching me. Or maybe it just is a weapon that transforms into into a series of preset ones, which can be still highly effective. But it always kind of seems as though that some characters may be somewhat more defined by what they use, kind of like how Gambit has his staff, and then Elektra has her size. Deadpool has his swords, and then you have Daredevil with his billy club. But at least the Ben Affleck version show the fact that okay, yes, I can. It's got the grappling hook. y- So I can extend it, and it seems like it can become it's a set of nunchucks. So you do want to make sure that if you are going to use a weapon, it really works for you. Because actually, when I actually started watching the source material for Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, they actually showed that while each character did have their own weapon to actually start with, those were not the ones that were used in battle. Those were essentially what they were put into stasis with, and within a short period of time, they just used so much physical power that they broke them. So essentially, they had to find very specially used ones because you never know. It's kind of like the idea would say, yes, I have a very good steel weapon, but you could be in some other franchise where Mithril is definitely up there, and it could actually slice right through certain forms of steel with very little effort. So you don't want to just be a standard, look at me, I've got a costume, I can fight, and said, let's hope, said I can survive the night. Because definitely said I would definitely would say is that combat training is definitely important for any metahuman to have, because you never know what you're going to fight and where they're going to come from. But you want to kind of would say that's more just a foundation character. You want to be able to surprise them with something, kind of like the idea of how if anyone's seen like the last Avatar, the last Airbender series, all the bending styles are from actual martial arts. So you can definitely would say yes, I do know how to fight without actually bending, but then you could be someone looking very nondescript, so you don't know what element they're affiliated with. Um, Even if you're just talking about just the three that had survived into the of a 100 Years War, and then all of a sudden, poof, here is a blast of fire or earth. So it's like you are definitely training yourself to go a higher level, but that doesn't mean that you purely have to just constantly use your chi to actually bend everything, because it always makes it seem as though that characters who have definitely been training for a long time seem to have an insane amount of stamina to actually, to have every part of their body ready to go. And so regular humans may not be able to do that for very long. I mean, sure, you have, power people that can definitely fight in massive tournaments and then also um, go on long runs and, other physical activities. But it almost would seem as though that someone who is, from a different reality would be able to do all that and would be able to get back up the very next morning and do it all over again, rather than someone saying, yes, you know, everything is done for the day. I'll see you in a couple of days because I'm exhausted. So you just don't want to actually. So if you really don't have anything like any can improve your under your basic human limits, and your weapons are standard, you're probably not going to last long against real characters. Yeah, so you just never know. So that's all I gotta say. Be back shortly with a video about certain types of power objects. So hope everyone does good and have a good one.